Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Hersey with Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. We expect to get started on time here in about 5 minutes. Good morning, everyone. I am Robert Hersey, and on behalf of the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association, welcome to today's webinar entitled Bouncing Back, a Practical Approach to Building Resiliency. This webinar is being made available through a collaboration of the Florida Department of Children and Families and the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. Please note that as an attendee, you are in listen-only mode and are only able to view your name. If you have questions, please send them to the presenter and myself, the host, by using the chat panel. The button to open the panel is usually located on the upper right side of your monitor. Please use the chat panel to send any questions you may have as you think of them. The presenter will address questions as time permits. Our audio is broadcast through the internet to your computer. If you experience poor computer audio at any time during today's presentation, there are a few options to try using the Communicate menu. You can view these options on screen right now, and these options are posted in the chat panel too. If you continue to experience poor audio through your computer, try using the I will call in option under the Communicate menu. The access code and event password are on your screen and in the chat panel. You must be connected to the audio of this presentation, as well as view it on screen to receive a certificate of attendance. The recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FATA website within 30 business days. To access the recording and PowerPoint, visit www.fata.org, navigate to the Resource Center, and click on Training Library as shown on the screen. FATA produces many webinars and workshops through the support of the Florida Department of Children and Families. To help participants track credits earned through attendance, we host an online community that provides a personalized digital journal where participants can maintain statements of credit for webinars and workshops taken through the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. At the end of today's webinar, the web browser will direct everyone to an evaluation form on the FATA website. You will first need to register or sign in to your account to complete the evaluation. Information you provide FATA as part of registering remains confidential. Statements of credit will be posted within 30 business days after the evaluation closes in individual professional development journals for persons completing the evaluation and attending the entire webinar. Completing the evaluation is necessary to receive CE credits or to access your statement of credit. Please note that the evaluation will close at midnight on Saturday, September 16th, 2023. Up to 2 continuing education credits are available for participating in today's webinar for persons licensed through the Board of Nursing, the Board of Clinical Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapy, Mental Health Counseling, and for persons credentialed through the Florida Certification Board. If you are a licensed healthcare practitioner, be sure to include your Florida license numbers for reporting to CE Broker when you register with our site for the first time. If you are certified with the Florida Certification Board or licensed outside the state of Florida, you do not need to provide your certification number when you register with our site. Please note that WebEx monitors arrival and departure of attendees and provides a report upon completion of the event. We are not permitted to provide a certificate of attendance if you do not attend the entire webinar, and we are not permitted to provide partial CE credit. Our speaker today is Laura Holley. Laura Holley is the Director of Training and Education for the Community Coalition Alliance. She has nearly 20 years of experience working in the areas of prevention and mental health in the nonprofit sector. Laura has a master's degree in counseling and executive leadership, over 18 certifications in evidence-based curricula, and became a United States Army Master Resilience Trainer while working in deployment cycle support with the Department of Defense. Laura spent a decade working with youth and families in the rural South Carolina Lowcountry before relocating to Florida in 2013, where she now lives in Orlando with her husband and teenage daughter. And now I'd like to welcome our presenter, Laura Holley. Ms. Holley, I will turn the presentation over to you.
Awesome. Well, good morning. Can you hear me okay, Robert?
I can.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, let's dive in. I'm super excited to be here today. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I do want to give a little bit, expand a little bit on the whole master resilience trainer thing, right? Because sometimes people go, what the heck is that? I've not heard of that before. Um, so I want to tell you a little bit about my journey with resiliency that brought me here today. When I was working for the Department of Defense at the Florida National Guard, that was where I was first introduced to resiliency as a science. And my mind was absolutely blown. It's what we all in the industries that I had been in had been working on all along, but did not know what to name it, did not know that there was science behind it. And it felt to us like I'm sure it does and has to some of you on the call, like we had been clawing through a concrete wall up to that point, right? It felt so abstract and like something that involved so much trial and error and so much happenstance. And to find out that scientifically it's not was just so empowering and so exciting. And so I became very on fire for it, dove right in, started studying resiliency deeply. And then in 2015, I had the opportunity, the honor of being one of the handful of civilians at the time who were sent off to become master resilience trainers. Working in a community mental health center after that, before joining the staff at CCA almost a year and a half ago, that resiliency training has traveled with me, and it's been a very exciting thing that I've been able to bring to several different environments. So what we're going to talk about today comes straight from there. Now, I will say that it's impossible to cover everything that has to do with the entire body of the study of resiliency in just 2 hours. But I'm going to give you what I think is a solid overview, and then we're going to kind of dive in to some things in a more specific way, so that we can walk away with some tools. But before I get started on that, I always like to begin any presentation that I'm doing by letting you know who the Community Coalition Alliance is and what we do, because at the end of the day, that's why I get to be here with you, right? So the Community Coalition Alliance, the CCA, we are a coalition of coalitions, so to speak. We serve as a collective voice for community coalitions that are working towards the health and wellness of all Floridians. And we do that several different ways. We are a membership body, so we have a membership, we have community coalitions in different counties who are members of our greater coalition, saturated mostly in the Northeast region because we are funded by the ME there, but we do have this growing valuable body of our membership in the Southeast region as well. And then we do have a handful of partner organizations in our membership body, like Project Opioid, who aren't coalitions, but are still very valuable to that collective voice. So we work with the membership body, and to that membership body, we provide some funding and oversight, not just through the ME, although that's a big chunk of it, but also through grants and other funding streams that we help them secure the way you can when you're part of a larger body. And then we, of course, help with the oversight and the management of those funds and make sure that everybody's kind of getting the most out of that in those communities. We also provide training and technical assistance. That's me. That's where I fall. And also partner connections, again, being able to have a bigger reach and connect more people to more people as a larger body. We're a data-driven organization. I can't stress that enough. We are driven by data and outcomes and science and research, and we value collaboration, advocacy, diversity, innovation. You will see those values show up in everything that we do. So that's a little bit about who we are, where I'm coming from, and why I get to be here today. So I'm excited about that. This is a little one we've got to add in there, right? So because although we are delighted to partner with FATA, we have so many shared values and overlaps. This slide is just that technical reminder that we are a separate organization, that the information and opinions that I share today are my own. It's also a reminder to you that the session is being recorded and will be published elsewhere, including the training library. Okay, so what are we going to learn today? Today, we are going to learn a couple of really exciting things. The first thing that we have to do is properly define resiliency. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on that. Resiliency, again, it's one of those words that's it kind of gets a bad rap as being a buzz phrase, right? We use the word, we kind of think we know what it means to us, what it means to someone else. It might be different, right? So it's really important that as we unpack everything we're going to unpack today, that we are on the same page about what the heck it is we're talking about, right? So we're going to fully define resiliency so that we all know what we're talking about. Part of that is going to be doing a little bit of myth busting as well. There's some very commonly held beliefs about resiliency that are just untrue. And so we're going to talk about what those most common ones are. You may think one of those is true, right? And that's okay. But we're gonna leave today a little wiser and more knowledgeable than we came in. When you do leave here today, you're going to understand resiliency a lot differently than a lot of other people. And so you might find yourself having to explain it to other people, and that's how knowledge spreads. So that's good. That's a good thing. One of the things that you'll learn today that I think is going to be new for most of you is that there are 6 pillars of resiliency. What do I mean by that? There are 6 areas of competencies that make up being a resilient person. And we're going to talk about what each one of those are, why that's the case, and how that sort of holds up the structure that is being a resilient person. So I think that that will be some new information for you and be able to kind of put some of those things that you already know in sort of their proper areas and go, oh, that's where that goes. That's why that's, something that's of value. And I knew it, I'm hoping you have a couple of those I knew it moments here as we line up what we know and what feels right with where the science and the research are. Finally, you're going to leave here today with several tangible activities, some things that you can apply to your own life, or for those of you who are on the call that work with others on this subject matter, you'll be able to replicate some of what we do today. You'll leave with some resources and some things you'll be able to use. What I would like you to do is to go ahead and get like a pen and paper handy, just nearby. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. The back of an envelope, if your desk looks anything like mine, will suffice. I figure with a group this size, there are some people who are going to want to participate and some who are going to prefer to just observe, and that's okay too. But if you're a participator, you're going to want to have paper and pen handy for some of the activities that I'm going to walk you through. You can do them with me, and I'll ask you some questions about how they were. And hopefully that will increase our understanding and our learning. Okay, so diving right in. What is resiliency, right? So what do I mean when I say resiliency? I want you to go ahead and drop in the chat box any words, phrases, a full-blown definition if you're feeling fancy, just don't look it up. How do you define resiliency? What pops into your head? What does that mean to you? If you want to go ahead and just kind of drop, oh, we're getting some really great stuff. Ability to overcome, determination, strength. Oh, it's going so fast. I love it. Recovering. Roll with the resistance. I love it. Bounce back. I'm seeing a lot of bounce back, perseverance, tenacity. Okay, fantastic answers. Thank you so, so much. So it absolutely is bounce back. Simply put, it's bouncing back from adversity, right? So it's the ability to be resistant to like the overwhelm that comes with adverse situations, right? And so many of the things that are showing up in the chat, like perseverance and tenacity and all of those wonderful words, those are all the skills that go sort of up under, that's the toolbox, right? That help become resilient. We're going to break down what all those different components are, okay? And I do see in the chat something that could be one of our myths. So I'm hoping we touch on that. So when I am in a physical classroom, there's an activity that I really like to do if they let me. And a lot of times they don't, I'll be honest. And you'll see why in a second. However, it's a great activity, and I'm going to share it with you for those on the call who might work with youth or even adults like this one, I'll be honest with you. And that is, I like to bring into the classroom a tennis ball and an egg. And we get chairs or tables or ladders or whatever we can get up the highest that we can go. And I get 2 volunteers and we hold it up way in the air. One person holds the tennis ball and one person holds the egg, and we drop them. One time at a youth camp, we had a beautiful concrete wall, and I brought a whole carton of eggs and tennis balls, and we just hurled those at the wall as fast as we could and as hard as we could, right? So what happens? Why do I do that? Um, Obviously, we make a mess, right? We make an absolute mess. The egg breaks, makes a mess on the floor, a mess on the wall, and the tennis ball bounces back. The tennis ball physically bounces back from the floor or the wall. But here's the thing, the same exact thing happened to the tennis ball that happened to the egg. It was dropped from the same height, sometimes by the same person, with the same force, the same velocity, the same speed. It hit the same surface, right? It was the exact same stimuli that happened to the tennis ball than what happened to the egg. It wasn't about what happened to the ball or the egg. It was about what it was made of. And the tennis ball was allowed to bounce back. I share that with you because for parents on the call or folks who work with youth, if you are working with resiliency, if you are talking about resiliency, if this is one of the topics that you're talking about, I encourage you to use the tennis ball, not just the imagery, like get actual tennis balls and put them in the kids' hands. It can be a very powerful visual and tangible reminder to work on resiliency, to practice resiliency, and that what you're made of matters, right? In some of the youth camps I've done, at the end of the week, I would give the kids tennis balls to take home. And then I would see those kids, a couple of years later, and they would go, Miss Laura, I still have my tennis ball. It sits on my dresser, right? So it's something so simple that I think can be very useful and really demystifies sort of what the heck we're talking about when we're talking about resiliency. So please feel free to use that imagery. Okay. Oh, I'm horrible at doing the slides. I'm so sorry. I will definitely get better at that. So let's myth bust a little bit here. Okay. So there's so many misconceptions about resiliency, so many things that we think make a person resilient, and it's just not part of it. And the first one is that resilient people always have it firmly together, that they don't give in to their emotions. Some people genuinely feel that the more resilient a person is, the fewer strong emotions they actually even get, right? That it's just this place of constant calm and constantly being composed, right? And that is just not true at all. Okay. One of the most resilient people that I have ever met in my life is this woman named Kristen. And Kristen worked with me at the Department of Defense, and she worked in family readiness. So she helped families navigate through pre-employment, pre-deployment, deployment, and then when they came back home with reintegration and all of that. And she was a rock for so many families. And then her own husband deployed. And I was there, and we were at the airport standing on the tarmac when the plane took off. And Kristen fell apart, absolutely, objectively fell apart. And then she got up and she handled her business and she took care of their child and she took care of her family and everything she had to handle, and went on to become an inspiration for everyone else who was going through the same thing and who would go on, who would go through that after. And I'm pretty sure she cried, like ugly cried, for like 12 months straight, like with no breaks. Her capacity for tears was great. But she was one of the most resilient people I've ever met, right? Because resiliency is messy. Resilient people, the difference is that they know how to regulate that. Okay. Um, they know how and when and where to express those emotions, right? So a great example with young people is, let's say you have found out that your friend said something bad about you behind your back, or did something behind your back, or posted something about you, or whatever the case may be. You find this thing out about somebody who you think is your friend, and then you go walk into science class where you have a quiz that day, and this is the first time you lay eyes on that person, right? All of those feelings and those emotions that you have when you walk in that room, not having those is not what resiliency is about. It's what are you going to do with it, right? The feelings that you're having, that's hitting the wall. It's in that moment that you determine if you're the egg or the tennis ball, right? So resilient people still feel all of the same things, but that resilient young person is going to know that science class is not the time or the place to have that conversation, that maybe yelling and losing their cool is not the method in which to have that conversation, right? They're going to have all those same feelings, but they're going to know how to regulate them a little bit better. Okay. That's the difference. The difference between a resilient person and a non-resilient person, not often, right? We're going to have the same emotions as everybody else. It's just what we do with it. Okay. The next one is that it's kind of related. And it is that resilient people have it all figured out. Okay. That they have it all figured out and that they never need help from anyone. Okay. And that, of course, also is false. Resilient people know that they don't know everything. They know that they can't do everything. They know that they're not perfect, and they know that they how to confidently rely on others. They aren't afraid to ask for help. Folks who are less resilient, or who have the wrong definition of resiliency that they're clinging to, often feel that the asking for help has a limit or is a sign of weakness, or that they're doing something wrong somehow, right? But resilient folks know that that is part of it, that that is a big part of it, okay? Um, the next one is that there's a common myth that resiliency is so insular that it only has to do with the individual and their personal skill set. And while that does make up for a lot of what goes into resiliency, it is false. Okay. Resilience has to do with both the individual and their relationships. And that's a really important distinction. We established already that resilient people ask for help, right? But what's more than that, what takes it kind of to the next level, is that they know how to build a network of people from whom they can ask for help. So some people have, and you'll hear this more as a reliant strategy in young people. It's more common that there's that person, there's that one person in their life that they can go to for everything, that they tell everything to, that they can rely on, right? And while that can be a beautiful thing to have in our lives, resilient people know that they have to go to the right person for help with the right thing. Okay. So we wouldn't go to a lawyer if we need medical advice, or a doctor if we need legal advice, right? So we have to go to the right person. One of my favorite examples of this from my life is my father, right? So I'm a daddy's girl, and I think my dad is the smartest man on the planet. He is a hard worker. He's been a business owner his entire life. He is an engineer. He's been married 50 years. He raised two kids. Like, to me, he's a shining example of so many things. And I respect and appreciate his values and all of that, right? So I go to him for a lot. I respect his opinion. I listen to what he says. And then I decided, when my daughter was very young, she was an infant, and I was going to go to grad school. And my father is not a woman, a wife, a mother, and has never gone to grad school. He was not the right person for me to go get guidance and advice and mentorship and real feedback on what that was going to look like, right? He wasn't the right person. Did I share that journey with him and value his feedback and his take on things? Absolutely, I still did that. But I went and found someone who had been where I wanted to go. And that's the thing. Resilient people know to build a network full of people who have been where they want to go, and not to take advice from people who haven't, right? On those specific things. So it's very important to do that. Here's the kicker where young people usually kind of get tripped up on this, is this does not have to be somebody that you are particularly close to, right? This is not, they just have to have the expertise that you need. It now, obviously you're not going to want to take advice from somebody you don't respect and those kinds of things, but like, it doesn't have to be your bestie. It doesn't have to be your ride or die. It doesn't have to be your favorite teacher. It doesn't have to be any of those things. It just needs to be the network of the right people who have the experiences that you hope to have in life that you can go to for help, right? Now, the last myth here is my favorite. It's my absolute favorite one because honestly, it is how I used to think about resiliency before I knew better, if I'm being completely honest. Um, Resilience is something you either have or you don't. Now, we all know people in life who seem to be incredibly resilient, right? They, they can take what life throws at them and they just seem to be able to handle it every time, right? They're like a duck. All the water just kind of goes off their back. And it seems effortless. And then we also know sometimes we're that person, sometimes we handle things really well. And then we also know people that are the exact opposite, right? Like a broken nail and a car accident, everything's a 10. It's all way up here, right? They can't seem to handle the smallest amount of adversity. And sometimes we are that person too, right? So we know that. So it's very easy to feel like it's just a character trait or a personality trait or a naturally occurring talent, right? But the thing is that anyone can develop resiliency. And I'm going to explain sort of why. What does that look like? My husband is a football coach, so I have sports analogies. I apologize in advance for that. I don't like them either, but they work. So I want to share one of those with you. If you have a group of 5-year-olds standing around and you throw a basketball into that group, there's going to be a kid that catches it. There's going to be a kid that naturally just is comfortable and knows how to navigate that basketball, where maybe you're going to show them one or two things and within a few minutes they can dribble. And everyone's going to look at that kid and go, wow, they have talent. They are going to be a basketball player, right? And then you give that same ball to my daughter when she was 5, and she's going to have a hard time holding on to it, first of all. And then when she does get a hold of it, she's going to skip up and down the court. Zero natural ability, none whatsoever. No naturally occurring talent for the sport. Okay. Fast forward 10 years. If that 5-year-old who had the natural talent never practiced, never learned, never played, never had coaches teach them what to do, never worked on it, and my daughter, in contrast, went all in and practiced her little heart out and learned and listened and paid attention and did it over and over and over again. Guess who's a basketball player and who's not, right? So yes, we have different starting points when it comes to resiliency, just like anything else. Some people may just be born with a little bit more natural talent to do some of these things more innately or more automatic than someone else. But just like with sports, with the right practice and the right coaches and the right targeted activities in the right areas, absolutely anybody can be resilient. Both of those people can be equally resilient that we talked about before, the person that can handle everything and the person that can handle nothing. And just like anything else, it is something that takes practice and work in the right areas. Okay, so then that begs the question, what are those areas? Okay, and that brings us to the 6 pillars that I mentioned before. Okay. These are the pillars, if you will, that hold up the house of resiliency, right? This is these are the pieces that when they are strong, you can say this is a resilient person, right? And this is what the science and the research and everything supports, okay? Optimism is one of the ones that we are going to unpack. So I'm not going to say too much about it quite yet, but I will say, spoiler, that I think it's going to surprise you about what it is and what it isn't. But the next two that we have here, I'm going to talk about those together because they are often packaged together, but there are differences, and that is self-awareness and self-regulation. Often in life, those concepts outside of resiliency, they're packaged together. They're incorrectly sold to us as self-control. I really don't like that because of the negative connotation that that word has gotten over time. It sort of implies that we don't have our entire range of emotions, that we're somehow like wrong or out of control for having them, and we already learned when we did the myth busting that that's just not true. What these mean instead, the way that they're written here, is that the ability to know what is happening with our thoughts and feelings, regardless of what it is that's happening, to have the awareness to be able to recognize it, to name it, to identify it, to understand why it occurs, what my triggers are, what my values are, all of those things, that self-awareness. Who am I, right? And then being able to regulate when and how we do certain things, or we act on certain emotions, or we express certain things, right? And we're going to look a little bit under the hood of those two pillars shortly. There's so much under there, but I've picked out a couple of things that I think you'll find valuable that we're going to do today. The next one is connection. Connection to other people is super critical. We've already talked about it a little bit, right? We already learned that building a network of support for when we need help, right? But connection is about so much more than that. It's about how we relate to people, our different communication styles, our personalities, our temperaments, like all of that is part of it, okay? The next pillar is mental agility, and that's essential for resilience. That's sort of the ability to sort of move and pivot our thinking and our actions and take in new information, right? Um, it's essential because it prevents us from being resistant to change. And change is such a huge part of life. You'll never avoid it, right? And the ability to adapt to change at a more appropriate rate, without some of the stressors that can come from when non-resilient people are adapting to change. There's so much power in that, for somebody's life, that reaches in so many different places. And so mental agility is an essential pillar. The last pillar, character strengths, it's a harder one to explain, but we're going to discuss it further in a little bit. But essentially, and there's a very specific method for this, which is why it's a little hard to sort of generalize, but we'll get to it. It's very important to know what you're good at, how to use it, how to leverage your strengths, how to work within your wheelhouse, and how to recognize those same things in other people. Again, that connection piece, and sort of how we operate within teams and groups and families and classes and all of that. Okay. These pillars, like the graphic shows, they hold up the roof, but there's so much more beneath them. Beneath each pillar are specific skills that then make that pillar strong, right? Um, so it holds up the house, but there's so many different things that make it strong, and each skill has activities that you can do that to practice and improve those skills. And as we begin to unpack these, I want to offer this: what you do for practice might not be what you do in real life, right? So going back to the sports analogies, I told you I have those, I'm so sorry. What you do, if you're looking at football, right, let's look at it through that lens. What you're doing in practice and on the practice field isn't necessarily the actual thing you will do in the game, right? So on the practice field, they work with tires and dummies and bags over and over again with very specific instructions, repetitions, goals, right? But when you get to that game on Friday night, you can look high and low and you're not going to see a single tire or bag on that field, right? In the game, they're also not counting and repeating, but the activities that were practiced built skills that hopefully show up in the game, right? The other thing that I want to offer before we dive into the specific skills is that as humans, we do not often rise to the occasion. It happens sometimes. I'll leave a little bit of a door open to that and say most of the time, right? But largely speaking, what we do instead is we fall to our highest level of mastery. This is why consistent practice is important for absolutely anything that we want to get good at, including resiliency, right? When you know that there are targeted things to practice and work on, that's how we get better. That's how things show up in the game, right? If you don't want to be on the bench on Friday night, you're going to have to show up at practice more than once a week. I mean, it's true for so many things, including resiliency. Okay. Um, so let's dive into the pillars. So let's start with optimism. That's the first one that we're going to talk about because it is the most misunderstood of all of the pillars. Okay. So here's what I want you to do in the chat. I want you to go ahead and drop what optimism is. What do you think? Is there phrases or words or definitions? Like, what is optimism? Okay, perfect. I'm seeing some start to come in now. So we're seeing positivity, lemons, looking at the bright side, positive attitude, courage all the time, rose-colored glasses, being happy and hopeful, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, finding the good in everything, open mindset. Okay, awesome. That was a great one. Somebody said, trying to find, I lost it because it's scrolling so quick, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel that is not the train. I loved that. Positivity when things are negative, positive thoughts. Look on the sunny side, half full, half empty. Okay, so here's the thing. I really don't want to make enemies of all of you, but it's all garbage. It's all garbage, right? We have kind of been lied to our whole lives about what optimism is because we have been told that it's all of those wonderful things that you guys just put in the chat. But honestly, sometimes in life, there's no silver lining. Sometimes it could actually not be worse. There are things that happen in life to people that are atrocious, right? Sometimes there's no better reason that a bad thing happens. And thinking that way can actually be harmful. So I want to talk about what do I mean by that before you all hate me. Let's look at this. This is what we've been taught that optimism is, okay? This is a picture of a storm, and someone is looking through the lenses and they are seeing a sunny day on the beach instead, okay? This is a fantasy. The person is seeing something that simply isn't there. And furthermore, it's dangerous. There's lightning on this beach and they need to get off the beach, right? You need to get off the beach before you, this is like the lightning strike capital of the world, right? Some parts of Florida. So we need to be careful and we need to not do this. This is dangerous. Versus this, okay? This is what I will offer this week, okay, to our conventional definition of optimism, okay? This man, he acknowledges that it's raining. In fact, he's taken measures to protect himself from the rain by grabbing an umbrella, but he is moving and looking forward in a direction where there is no rain, right? He knows that the rain doesn't exist everywhere, nor will it last forever. Those are so important. There's hope in the storm. That's optimism. The knowledge that there is something beyond the rain. True optimism is hope. Okay. And, some of you got that in some of the things that you dropped in the chat. I did see that show up a little bit, even sort of the light at the end of the tunnel. That's all that same sort of imagery, right? So I'm going to go back here really quick because I want to point out again, this is toxic positivity. This leaves no room for negative emotions. You can't feel badly about the storm because it doesn't exist. You're just talking crazy now, right? Now think of some of the things that we said before through this lens, right? And what about there's some very trendy things that fall under this toxic positivity umbrella right now for the parents and the folks who work with teenagers in the room. You're going to come up against this a lot, right? This positive vibes only, choose happiness, right? All of those things that don't take into account that negative experiences and emotions are very real and they can exist and it's okay, right? So my rule of thumb is if it makes for like a great hashtag and it looks nice on a mug, throw it out because all it's doing is oversimplifying something that is actually emotionally complex. And it can create um, feelings of inadequacy and guilt and shame. Like, why am I not able to choose happiness? I'm supposed to just have positive vibes only and I don't, right? There's so many really great, like reimagined definitions of optimism coming in the chat. I love it. And optimism is a realist with hope. Being in the valley, but you can get out by walking up the mountain. Absolutely, right? Because it takes work. I actually love that imagery. Okay, so getting back on track here. So why is optimism important? We're going to break this down further so that when we get to through the end of talking about this, we're going to really understand why, how it holds up that pillar and how it fits into resiliency. Okay. So, why is optimism important for resiliency? Okay. It's optimistic people are able to find hope and remain realistic. We saw that show up in the chat box, right? folks who have that hopeful optimism as a default, they're able to better identify what they can control. There's so much power in knowing what we can control and what we can't. And they're able to focus on solutions when change is possible. They learn from failure, they take better care of themselves, right? And they fight their natural negativity bias. Let me talk for a second about what that is. So we are hardwired as human beings from, back when this kept us alive, right? It's still stuck in there. But we are hardwired as human beings to weigh the negative differently than we weigh the positive. There's not something wrong with us. We're not a pessimistic person or a downer just because we have this natural tendency. We all have it. It's just to what degree we are indulging in it, right? And where this comes from is if you've had, you know, two positive things happen in your day and one negative thing, and I say, gee, how was your day? A lot of us would say it was really bad because this bad thing happened, right? We weigh it differently. And so it's important to know, number one, that exists. Okay. That is a thing that our brains do, right? And when we develop our optimism with intentional practice, which we're getting to, um, we naturally fight against our negativity bias. Okay. And that's a powerful thing that can help with resiliency, because it helps to foster and create that hope that we know is so important. So before, when I said we don't rise to the occasion, usually that's my disclaimer. Often we simply fall to our highest level of mastery. There are some very specific things that we can practice that will increase our level of mastery of optimism, and therefore put a very strong pillar in place in that house of resiliency that we are trying to build. One of them is to actively work against catastrophic thinking when it occurs, and to be intentional about putting things into perspective. Although it's not one of the activities that we're doing today, there are some exercises that can support this. I'm going to just briefly verbally describe one of them, because I think you'll find it really interesting. And it does involve like the actual act of writing it down. Okay, that's really important. And we're actually going to talk about that when we do this next exercise. But this one, we can actually write it down, but it's one that we can also use verbally if somebody that we know is catastrophizing, if they're getting kind of worked up, worst case scenario type of thing. If we can start with number one, identifying the problem, that's step one, identify the problem, right? And then step two is to go ahead and talk about the worst case scenario. All of those things that are floating around in your head, that even the ones are unrealistic, but you have them, right? Like, absolute catastrophic, it ends in the destruction of the world, right? Because you got a 60 on the math test, whatever, right? Like you're trying to call your significant other and they're not answering their phone, they must be dead in a ditch, right? But then we're going to challenge ourselves or the person that we're talking to go even further, right? Almost to the point where it's comical, right? And just start talking about all the, yeah, but then after you die, you're going to haunt everybody, whatever, right? Like, let's just start to get some of that unrealistic worst case scenario stuff, right? Then, okay, we're going to flip to the other side. What's the best case scenario? And let that be as absurdly ridiculous as the worst case, okay? I can't reach them because they had a winning lottery ticket and they're in a little room where they're not allowed to have their phone. And then we're going to go run off to this island, whatever, right? As crazy as we can get it. This is a very fun activity to do in a group of teenagers, by the way, because you can walk around and go, and then what? And then what? And everybody shouts out stuff and it gets wacky, right? But then you bring it back in and you say, okay, all right, now we have this worst case scenario, this best case scenario. What you'll find at this stage in the activity is the person who was catastrophizing a few minutes ago has calmed down a bit and they're laughing, right? Now we're going to say, what's the most likely? What is the most likely? And the most likely is not always great. It's not always bad. Sometimes it includes some elements of that worst case scenario in the very beginning when it was realistic. You know, maybe they had car trouble, maybe there's an issue, right? And then we're going to come up with an action plan to deal with that most likely scenario, right? So that's an example when I say there are activities that we can do to change this way of thinking. When we're talking about perspective and we're talking about catastrophizing, that's one of the activities that we do, okay? Another one is to work on using a resilient inner voice. Okay. For some of us, how do you not make them feel like they're being made fun of? See, there's a question in the chat. She said, how do you not make them feel like they are being made fun of? Um, if we were actually doing this activity, you would see a little bit better sort of how it works. I decided at the very last minute to verbally explain it to you, and full disclosure, that might have been a bad choice because I can't fully show you without doing it. But to answer your question, like I was saying before, what we practice on the practice field is not what we're doing in the game. So when we are talking to somebody about practicing this perspective, we're not starting it for the first time with somebody when they are actually catastrophizing about a current situation and they are worked up in the moment. That's a different thing, right? Resiliency is a preventative skill. It's a proactive thing that we want to build with people. So if we notice that somebody typically catastrophizes and we're working on this with that person, we might do this as an exercise and as a practice on the training field, right? Where we say, okay, like let's pick out something that you catastrophized about recently and it ended up being okay, right? Now let's walk through that as our example. And then we kind of walk through it that way. So that's one way. The other way to do this in the training field, again, is if you're doing like a group of people, if you're in a classroom or you're, teaching a workshop, then you say like, all right, let's come up with this collective example. Like, ooh, what about when we can't reach the person that, who catastrophe, who assumes they're dead in a ditch, right? And people will be like, oh my gosh, I absolutely do that. But they're not doing it in that moment. So it's less personal, right? So I hope that helped a little bit kind of describe how you might use this to help build resiliency where it's not an attack, right? Because that's a very valid question. Okay. So this next bullet, using a resilient inner voice. For some of us, that does not naturally occur, right? For some people, there is that sort of naturally resilient inner voice, different starting points, right? That we're all at. But things like daily affirmations can really help with that. That again, that practices it so it shows up in the game. The last one, which is the one that we are going to unpack today, is gratitude journaling. So I'm going to ask Robert, he has a link that he's going to drop in the chat here to a template for a gratitude journal. There it is. Great. Awesome. Thank you. If you are like me and you are sitting next to a printer, feel free to print that if you want to follow along. Or just grab your piece of paper and that's fine because we're going to get there in like a minute or so about what we're going to do to talk about that. Okay. Um, so one of the things when we walk through this exercise, one of the big things we're going to talk about is the why. Why do we do this and why does it help? I've always felt like most discussions about practicing gratitude, they kind of fall apart when it comes to discussing how the exercise helps us in the big picture. The other thing that I will offer before we get started is that some of you get really happy when we say journal because they're just like, oh my gosh, this is my jam. Let me go get my book, right? And then others of us would rather have a root canal. And I get that. Okay. I totally get that. So I will offer this. A gratitude journal does not have to be a long, extensive free writing exercise. In fact, I am going to make sure to teach you the absolute bare minimum amount of writing that you need to do in order to see benefits. I think it's important to know that, right? Because when we're, we don't want to add more things to our plate, right? And of course, if you want to do more, that's great too. But the science is very specific. The research is very specific about if you do this, and more isn't always more. But if it feels good and you enjoy it and you want to do more, that's great. Okay. So I say all that to say, don't be afraid of the word journaling. So here we go. What does it look like? What is it that we're going to want to do? And why does it help us? Okay. First of all, my template is not the end all be all. If you Google gratitude journals, you're going to get a wide variety of examples, everything from free downloadable templates that you might like better than this, every up into and including like whole books with prompts that you can buy on Amazon. Oh, we have a journal creator on with us. Awesome, Dominique. Thank you for sharing that. And there's also apps, right, that you can use. You can also write this on a sticky note and throw it out, right? You don't have to keep it. So any method that speaks to you the most, there's no right or wrong choice here. My templates here, you can have this, replicate it, use it however you want, right? It's fine. Before you choose what book or paper you want to use, let's cover briefly what it needs to allow you to do. Like, what are the rules, if you will, of the kind of good gratitude journaling that will build enough optimism to support being a resilient person? First, you have to write down 3 good things every day. And yes, you have to write it down. There's so much research that supports those neurological benefits of writing it down. But here's the good news. There's not much of a difference at all between writing and typing when it comes to those psychological benefits. So feel free to use an app on your phone as well, right? App, notes in your phone, whatever. Okay. So we're going to write or type. The second, arguably the most important part of this, is that you have to reflect. This can be like a whole page of free writing if you want it to be, but it only has to be 1 sentence, right? Just 1 sentence reflecting on why each thing is a good thing or what it means to you, right? Why? Because we savor the bad things. We don't just say the bad thing and move on, right? Going back to the example I gave about negativity bias, if I ask you, do you have a good day or a bad day? And you say it was a bad day because this bad thing happened. Um, and if I said, oh my gosh, what was so bad about that? You would have an answer. You would have several answers, and you would be able to go on and on and on and tell me why something was a bad thing. And if I said, what else happened today? And you mentioned one of the good things, if I asked you the same questions and said, why is that a good thing? You would probably be surprised by the question. It might even make you a little uncomfortable. And you might say something like, I don't know, it's just good, right? We don't savor the good things the same way we savor the bad. So this gratitude journal is designed to replicate that, right? We want to savor some of those good things. So now what kind of things do we write down? Anything good. Some days you are going to have great things to write down, and this will be so easy. There are moments in life that are beautiful and spectacular and notable and core memories. And when you reach those days, this is going to be the easiest thing you've ever done in your life. Other days are going to be a stretch. Okay. Last month, I'll give you an example of some of the things I've written down because I've been keeping a gratitude journal for like 7 years. Last month, on the 24th, Starbucks released their fall flavors. I had getting a pumpkin spice latte down as one of my items in my gratitude journal. It's small and it's silly. And my reflection was like something about it being like the start of the season and it makes me happy, blah, blah, blah. But then as I started thinking about it more, I said to myself, I said, you know what? I just treated myself to a $6 cup of coffee. And there was a time in my life when I couldn't have done that. And that feels really good. Right. So I found something meaningful in 1 sentence that answered the question, why was this a good thing for me? Right. Earlier the same month, I had a huge professional accomplishment on my list that I wrote 2 paragraphs about. Right. Some days are just easier than others, but it's really important to find 3 things every day in order to see benefits. And to see benefits, we're going to want to do this 30 days or more in a row. Okay. So, what are those benefits that we're going to see? Benefits of intentional daily practice of gratitude. Folks who do this for 30 days or more report that they are healthier, happier, more productive, they sleep better, and they have better relationships. This is certainly worth trying. Okay. Now, here's the piece that I feel like is missing from a lot of these conversations, and this is what I want to talk about. Why does this build resiliency? Why do we do this? Okay. Let's say something truly awful happens in my life. One of the worst things that someone can experience in life, and at some point we all do. Let's say I experience the loss of a loved one. Am I really going to sit there and think to myself, yeah, but at least my job rocks and I had that pumpkin spice latte? Absolutely not, because I'm in the game now. Okay. And what we do on the practice field is not the exact same thing we do in the game. But by practicing gratitude consistently, we are retraining our brain. We are creating balance so that our brain naturally understands and fundamentally knows that good and bad exist in our world equally, and that that is an automatic feeling, maybe not even one we can name or place, right? It's such an important foundation to help us bounce back from adversity, is to retrain our brain that way. This is very similar to the running back who runs through the tires on the practice field so that he automatically lifts his knees higher during the game. You write down and reflect on 3 good things every day so that your world does not fall apart when bad things happen. So I hope that makes sense. I feel like that's the missing piece that we don't often talk about. Okay, so let's move on to the next set of pillars. Um, and let's talk about some of the activities that are under these. Okay. One pillar does not by itself hold up an entire building. So we're going to need to talk about these. They are separate with separate skills, but one bleeds so seamlessly sometimes into the other. In order to regulate something, we have to be aware of it, right? And so they bleed seamlessly into each other. So I do want to talk about them together, but I will point out the areas in which this is that separate pillar, that we are building up. Okay, so people who have the competencies of self-awareness and self regulation, right? They are able to identify thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. We're actually going to do an exercise next that's really going to help see how we can actually beef that part up. And then they're able to regulate impulses and emotions to get better results. You see how that's separate? It's like, I can, it's the first step, right? I can identify it at least. And maybe I'm doing a horrible job regulating it right now, but at least I know what's happening. I'm not surprised by my emotions. I understand where they're coming from. My next step now is going to be to regulate, right? So folks who have these can do both. They also can go deeper and identify counterproductive patterns of thinking in order to stop them. They can express emotions appropriately and are able to remain open and curious. So those are really good skills that we can be able to do if we have these pillars kind of firmly intact. There are so many specific skills that go into these particular pillars, and so many different things that we can practice to help build this area of resiliency. We're going to unpack two of them first, but like first I want to kind of mention all of them. This is where goal setting fits, right? I'm hoping this is one of those, oh, I knew it, aha moments for you, right? Like, we know that goal setting is good. It's a good thing to do. It's a good practice to teach people. It's a good thing to work with young people on, right? It actually is research and science-based, proven to be a part of resiliency. It's a resilient skill, okay? The intentional act of setting goals, long and short term, with action plans and timelines, and executing those plans helps build resiliency. But again, you're going to want that intentional act. So there's so many things out. I mean, I have my own, but there's so many things out there. If you just Google, like, goal setting plans, right? Do an actual written plan. The next one is being able to recognize when our thinking might be flawed, with thinking traps or something that's hidden under the surface, like a trigger. This is a very valuable and helpful skill. There's also a specific activity that I wasn't sure what to call it, that was more general. I call it mental games. And it helps us with regulating in high pressure situations. And it's similar. I don't want to say it's similar to meditation, but maybe like visualization and just sort of that brain break that we might sometimes need kind of in the moment. And there are so many things that we can do to practice that skill. One of the things that I teach people to do to practice that skill is to get all of these things that we can do in our brain for games that no one knows we're doing. So we don't need pen or paper or anything like that. Just uh, like depending on how old you are, this is more challenging. Like me, it's really challenging to try to remember the names of every high school teacher I had, right? Or the lyrics to my favorite song backwards, right? So when we're in a high stress situation and we just need a break, create one, by giving your brain something else to think about, but sort of have these pre-planned, have your sort of bag of tricks of games that you do, mental games, right? So that's that concept. We're not going to go too deep into that one today, but that's a way to build that self-awareness and self-regulation, the awareness of needing the break and the regulation of sort of stopping the snowball going down the hill for a moment so we can collect ourselves. And and then of course, in addition to that, there's that general energy management and stress management. Those are two very different things because energy is not bad, right? Like our adrenaline and our excitement sometimes needs managing as well. It needs regulating just as much as our stress. I know for me it does. And finally, one of the ones that we're going to discuss deeper, that it's important to be able to identify and understand our own emotions, no matter how complex they are. Okay, so I am going to share with you this, which to me is the foundational skill of most of resiliency. So if you, I teach certain workshops and classes all over the place. If you ever find yourself in one of my workshops, again, that has to do with resiliency or a different skill, I can promise you, you're going to see this graphic again. Because so many of the skills, they come from here, from different things we discover here. So this is what I want to offer you today because it's so foundational, right? I like to refer to this as our emotional anatomy. Um, it's the fundamental makeup of our emotions, and here's how it works, right? There's the thing that happens to you, an activating event, if you will, right? A thing. We have some immediate uncensored thought about it, and then we feel a certain way or we do a different thing. We do a certain thing. So in the box, the square is that thing. The thought bubble is what we have, that uncensored, automatically occurring thoughts about it. And then in the circle, you're seeing how you feel and what you do, those emotions and those reactions. Okay. Here's the thing, it's the thoughts that are creating those emotions and reactions, not the thing that happens to us. It's the way that we interpret it and think about it. And so often we get that wrong. It's very hard to capture without training. Okay, it's very hard to capture. So I put up an example because we'll work within this. This is gonna help us a little bit more because it's not abstract, not as abstract. Okay. Um, Somebody wrote something bad about you on social media, okay, and you think, what a jerk. You feel rage and you fight with them. Okay, so that's sort of a naturally occurring cycle. The issue is that the process goes so fast that we often aren't even aware of the thought unless we've been trained to look for it. It feels like someone wrote something bad about me on social media, it made me enraged, and I fought with them, right? We skip the part about the thought. Stephen Covey of the Seven Habits franchise, the Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, Family, Teens, the whole conglomerate, he said it best in his chapter about being proactive. And he said, between what happens to us and what we do, there's a space. It is in the awareness of that space that we find the ability to evaluate and regulate it. This is where we find resiliency skills. But this is one of those things that will never happen if we are doing it for the first time or the first several times in the moment with the emotions being real as it is unfolding. This requires practice. This requires proactive, intentional practice, right? Um, think about what would have happened in this exact example if we had the immediate automatic thought, and it doesn't even have to be a positive one. Let's say somebody wrote something bad about you on social media and you immediately thought, oh, people are going to believe that. You're not necessarily going to feel rage and fight with them. You're going to feel embarrassment or panic, and you're going to start calling your friends, or you're going to maybe not want to go to school or work, right? Like depending on how you react to embarrassment and that kind of thing, right? Um, so asking ourselves, what would have happened if there was another thought there? How would I have felt and reacted? So here's the thing, we can actually have more than one thought and therefore more than one emotion. I mean, have you ever felt angry and sad at the same time? I absolutely have, right? I think all the parents that are here probably have felt angry and sad at the same time. I feel like that's sort of a staple of our experience. But this is the breakdown of why. Okay, why do we sometimes have all of these conflicting feelings that happen to us in a situation at the same time, right? And it's because we have these different thoughts, right? So somebody wrote something bad about you, you're thinking at the same time all these naturally occurring thoughts like, what a jerk, how could they, and people might believe it. Each one of them has a corresponding emotion and reaction. What a jerk makes me feel rage. How could they makes me feel sadness. People might believe it makes me feel embarrassed, right? So then we have that sort of cocktail of emotions that are happening because of all these thoughts that are happening. And we're not even aware of the thoughts. So, how do we do this? That begs the question, the right way to build resiliency. Okay. So, this is going to start before this ever has a chance of showing up in the game, right? We are going to need to practice this. This has to be a training field activity. So, this happens after the fact, right? When we have a thought that doesn't serve us, an emotion that doesn't serve us, rather, like we have some sort of reaction. Putting it back in the adult world, let's say I'm headed somewhere and somebody cuts me off on I-95 and I think, what a jerk, and I get really angry. Now I get to my destination and I'm mad. I am not having a good time. I'm allowing this to ruin my day. I was not at all resilient to the activating event that happened to me, right? This is when I can intentionally use this skill to sort of figure out where my emotions and thoughts are coming from and make an effort to temper them, right? I might look at it critically and say, like, okay, so they cut me off. I got so mad. Why? What was the thought? What about that made me so angry, right? Sidebar, what questions work way better than why questions for yourself and for other people too, because it doesn't create the same defensiveness. And we can ask about specific things. So, what about that made me so angry, right? And then I can work to uncover the thought. Once I do, that's that self awareness pillar. Okay, great. I check one, right? Then I'm going to want to dig a little deeper and I'm going to want to say, is that serving me? Okay. The answer is probably no if I've decided to sit down and use the skill, right? We can guess that it's probably not serving me the way I want it to, right? And now we get into this last piece. And this is where I disagree with most people and most of what we've all been taught about this stuff. I don't believe that you actually have to change any of the thoughts that you are having that aren't serving you. That being said, you might choose to, and that's terrific. That's fine. But I don't think it's a requirement in order to build resiliency. So often when we talk about mindset, the conversation is around change. You got to change it. You got to change it. This is wrong. This is bad. Somehow we got to change it. Right. I'm not sure that's a realistic starting point, and I think it makes it feel very unattainable. Instead, I think that we can honor the naturally occurring thoughts and feelings that we have, and we can practice by intentionally adding additional thoughts to see what impact that they have, right? So we already established that multiple thoughts and feelings can exist at the same time. So let's, for the beginning, let's just leave the ones we already have. That's cool. But they're not serving me. So let me add something else, right? So if somebody cuts me off and they ruins my day, and I figured out what the thought is, and I can think, okay, so I thought, what a jerk, and I got really angry. I see that. What else could I have thought in the moment, but I didn't, right? Maybe I could have thought that that was a dangerous thing to do. Now, that didn't naturally occur. So I'm not going to buy it right away. It's okay. We're going to go through the practice anyway, and we're going to help retrain our brain, right? It's the practice field, not the game. And then you continue by saying, like, okay, so I thought it was dangerous. I might feel concerned and I might back off or switch lanes. We can introduce new thoughts as a way to practice having some different perspectives. There's two benefits here. One is we're retraining our brain, and then hopefully, eventually, this shows up in the game, right? Where we are aware of multiple thoughts. Our emotions are different. They're not that sort of singular negative emotion, right? But the other thing is, even in the moment, if you do this, you will find that you're probably still angry, but you might not be enraged, right? So adding that additional thought and entertaining what that emotion would be, even if we're not actually feeling it, has a way of tempering the one that we are feeling. So it's a worthwhile exercise in the moment, and certainly worthwhile like down the road. Okay. Other ways we can use this same skill. We want to look for, like, there's so many things we can do with this skill once we master being able to identify the thoughts we are having and the emotions they create. One of the more useful ways to use this is to just keep a log, right? Log all of the thoughts and the corresponding emotions that you have. Every time you do this, just be like, this, I had this thought, and this thought creates this emotion for me. And then start to look for patterns. Oh, every time I think this, I feel this, right? And then we can find patterns in our own thinking that can help us avoid certain pitfalls. One of those pitfalls are things that I like to call thinking traps. Those are common types of counterproductive thinking that don't serve us, right? These are the thoughts that if we're going to focus on changing anything, these might be the ones we choose to change, right? If we decide to go that route, because we can identify, oh, they're actually flawed, right? So this might actually not be the correct evaluation I've given this by giving this thought, right? Um, the first ones are mind reading, jumping to conclusions. We want to make sure we're not connecting dots that aren't there, that we're getting actual evidence, that we're not assuming we know how someone's thinking or feeling, or assuming they know how we're thinking and feeling, right? Have I been specific enough? Did I ask specific questions, right? We want to stay away from consistent self-blame. If I'm the cause of every problem, maybe I need to start asking myself, how did other people or circumstances contribute? And if I start to see that pattern of thinking, right? The opposite is true as well. If I'm consistently blaming others for every problem, maybe I need to start looking at how did I contribute, right? And take a look at that critical question. Be careful if we start seeing patterns of always and everything. What that is, somebody wrote something bad about me on social media. I will never have friends. This always happens. I, had this bad thing at work. I'm bad at my job. I'm a bad spouse. I'm a bad parent, right? Like if it's one thing stinks, everything stinks. If this stinks, it's going to stink forever, right? When we start to get into those patterns of thinking, that's when we need to really pay attention to our mental and emotional state. This is where sometimes we can see where depression is happening. This is hopelessness and helplessness. So pay attention if we see those consistent themes of always and everything. And some of the critical questions we can ask to try to get out of those patterns are really forcing ourselves to get specific with the time boundness of it, right? How long is this really going to affect my life realistically? Not how long does it feels like forever, but really how long is this going to impact my life? And then like what specific areas of my life does this actually impact? And can I identify areas of my life that it does not? That can help, the practice of that can help us, right? Okay. Also check for emotions that don't match. Everything we've talked about so far matches, right? What a bleep, bleep, bleep. I'm going to feel angry, right? Oh no, people might believe it. I'm going to feel embarrassed. What if we have a gross overreaction or underreaction? Okay. Um, not to the situation, right? So if I have a thought that is violent and I punch somebody in the face, that might be an overreaction to what happened. It might not be a good choice, but if the thought was a thought of rage, it matches. Okay. It's when we have thoughts that don't match, like I'm disappointed in something and I fall into a deep despair. Okay, now it doesn't really match because disappointment is not despair, right? So when they don't, dig deeper, right? Sometimes that's where we're going to uncover what I call hidden stories, right? And those are those triggers, those are those things that are coming up for us that really don't have to do with this situation. They might have to do with something from our past. They might be a core value or belief. They might not even be a bad core value and belief that got poked. It just might need to be a little more flexible in this particular situation if it's not serving us, right? Or not. Or we might decide, you know what, I'm not going to apply any flexibility to that. But the act of understanding it is going to be better. So there's exercises you can do. It's not ones we're going to get into today, but there are things you can do when those don't match to try to uncover those hidden stories. But for now, it's really important to just know that when they don't match, try to refrain from acting, right? All right, so let's move on to stress. This is still under that self-awareness and self-regulation pillar. There are so many different types of stress, and therefore there are so many different tools. Robert's going to go ahead and drop the next worksheet in the chat. If you're next to a printer, thank you, Robert. Go ahead and print that or grab your paper. This one I'm going to ask for a little feedback on as we walk through it. Okay. This particular tool is for one of the types of stress that I see very often in today's world, particularly, and that's overwhelm. That's when there are 100 little things happening, maybe some big things, little things, and it all just feels like too much all at once, right? I often call this being stoned to death with popcorn, right? It's just a lot. And there's a worksheet for this tool, right? So like I said, Robert dropped that in there. Okay. And feel free to use this and replicate it and all of that. It is yours now. Okay. What are we going to do? The first thing that we're going to do, step one, is we're going to brain dump. So I want you to start writing down all the things that stress you out. So you can go ahead and start writing. I am going to talk a little bit so that it's not completely boring for the folks who are choosing to just observe and listen. So while you're writing, I do want to give you a couple of tips, right? I want you to name names, be very specific, right? Um, like you can't just write your kids, right? You can write like that my kids throw their dirty clothes 6 inches from the hamper, right, on the floor. That's one. Okay. Somebody said I'll need more paper. I feel that, Barbara. I do. But and then maybe it's not little stuff like that, right? It might be I'm worried about their future. I'm worried about being able to provide. I'm worried about being a good parent, right? And their inability to throw their dirty clothes in the hamper, right? So it's okay if you have like 6 entries that are the same, like about the same person or the same situation, like just whatever is creating that stressors in your life, right? Just go ahead and brain dump them. I'm going to brain dump them down. All right. Now, the next thing that we're going to do, if you're ready, we can move on with just the ones that we have. Decide what on your list is a big deal or a little deal. So if you're using the worksheet, there's little boxes labeled B and L for big and little that you can just move that stuff down to. If you're on a piece of paper, you can just put a B and an L next to the items that you wrote. But here's the thing. I might have the same exact thing written down as you do. And for me, it's a big deal and you, it's a little deal. And that is okay, right? You decide whether it's a big deal or a little deal. But there's some things that can help guide us in that decision. Asking questions like, is this going to matter in 5 years in my life? Does this change the trajectory of my life? Does it change the life of someone that I care about? Does it change a relationship that I care about, like fundamentally, right? So another thing that I will offer is little deal does not mean little stress. Some little deal things can cause us a great deal of stress. And don't be afraid to call something a little deal. We're not throwing them away. Little deals still matter, but it is important to know which box they belong in, right? And we're going to kind of get to that because we're going to do one more thing with those boxes. So. All right. So the third step, once we've decided if they are big deals or little deals, is going to be determining the level of control that you have over each of those items. Ooh, that's such a hot button topic, right? All right, so here's what your page needs to look like. Just do like 4 quadrants if you're not using the worksheet, okay? And label them as such. And I'm going to keep this up here so that we can work with it a little bit better. Okay. Here's the thing you have to be willing to let go of when you're talking about control. You got to let go of fair and unfair and just and unjust, right? Um, what do I mean by that? I mean that if you have a measure of control, let's say one of your stressors is a conflict with a specific person and you didn't start it. And you shouldn't have to be the one that, there's that fair and unfair, there's that just and unjust. What we're doing right now is not determining action. What we're doing right now is just determining the level of control, not whether or not we're going to exercise that control. Just do we have it? Okay. Is there some measure of control that we have? Yes, Barbara, to answer your question, you can feel unsure if it's a little deal or a big deal. If we were in an in-person workshop and we had more time, I would force you to make a choice and we would talk through it. But asking some of those questions, it's very normal to feel very unsure. Usually, and it might not be the case for you, Barbara, but usually we feel that way if it's a little deal that's causing us a tremendous amount of stress. And that might not be the case for you, but like, just take a look at that. Maybe it is, right? And we can kind of work from there. Sometimes when we're unsure if it's a big deal or a little deal, it's something we recognize as a really big deal, but maybe it's not causing us so much stress. So we're like, maybe that's not such a big deal, but it actually is changing our life, our trajectory of our life, or our relationship, right? So usually it's those two things that are in conflict somewhere. Okay. So we're going to put those in these boxes here. You guys should be working on that, and determine where those things belong. So now all of the things that you wrote in your brain dump initially should be in one of these boxes. Okay. So we're getting somewhere now. We have chopped this up into bite-sized pieces, and we are starting to do something. Now, I do have a confession to make. Before, when I said we were, not to be afraid of calling something a little deal and that we weren't going to throw it away, I lied a little bit, not a lot, I lied a little bit. However, in this first box here in the bottom right, that's what I like to call the suck it up box, right? Because we already decided that it's a little deal. We already decided that we can't do anything about it. Okay. So we need to figure out a way to let that go, right? We got to suck it up. That's where that's the one piece that I might have been less than completely honest with you with. All right. Now, going over to the other little deals, okay? Little deal controllable. These aren't big deals, and we have some measure of control over them. So we have choices here. We have a lot of choices here. But at the end of the day, we want this box to be empty. That's the goal with this box. It should be empty because we're going to farm everything out somewhere else. We're either going to take quick action on it because we determined we can control it, and we're going to fix it. Or we're going to push it over into the suck it up box. It's not a big deal. And we're going to go ahead and let that box stay empty. Okay. I see this question here. I don't want to lose that. Robert, can you capture that question for me so I can come back to it after we do the chart?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Okay. Because it's a great question. Big deal, uncontrollable. So this is why I covered emotional anatomy with you first. You remember how I said that matters with so many things? Okay. Big deals, got to do something about them, right? We can't control them. There's nothing we can do about it. That puts us in a very difficult position. The only options that we have here are to really try to figure out if there's a different way that we can think about the situation. If there's another perspective, another way that we can look at it. It's a selfish skill. It's not to make anything else better except for our own results. And that's okay, right? Like if this is something that is causing us stress, this is something that is weighing on us heavily, putting in some of the work, some of the mindset and emotional anatomy work here is going to be what's going to be the most helpful. Skills that we're not covering today that have to do with stress management, like deep breathing and all of that, that can also help with some of these stressors. But in terms of what we've unpacked today, that mindset and that looking at it from a different thought process is going to be our best option here. Okay. This last box, big deal controllable. This is the big scary action box. Big scary action. Why do I call it that? I call it that because very typically what is in this box, if we take action on it, things are going to change. We're going to change jobs. Our relationships are going to change. Our boundaries are going to change. People might be upset with us for these changes. Our living situations might change. These are usually game changers, okay? Which is why we avoid them at all costs, typically. But now we've isolated them. We've gone through this whole exercise and we are looking at these big deal controllable things. This is a big deal and I can do something about it. Then we have to ask ourselves the hard question, why haven't I? Right? And that's where we need to take action. So the last step of this is to look at that big deal controllable box and to choose one action today, tomorrow, or this week that will maybe not fully eradicate, but will address, will have an impact on one of the things in that box. Here's a question I have for you guys. I'm not going to ask anybody to share what's in their big scary action box, but how many items are in there? How many items are in your big scary action box? 4, 3, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2. Oh, somebody said too many. Oh no. Okay. Usually, oh, somebody said too many that shouldn't be there. Okay. All right. 0. Great. 2. So typically what we will find is there are few, keep in mind that we did this exercise as a response to overwhelm. So we were dealing with gigantic lists. And now we've got 2, 3, 0, 1, right? When we whittle it down to say, this is actually the thing, what we find when we take action on that part of our overwhelm, the other things matter less. They bother us less. Okay. So when I look at my big deal controllable box, and I want you to look at your boxes and decide if it rings true for you right now. When I look at that big deal controllable box of mine, and I start to take action on those, and those things start to lessen or go away, all that stuff in the little deal boxes bothers me a whole lot less. That's resiliency, right? I'm way more resilient to those little things in life because I'm not so overwhelmed and broken down and distracted by the big stuff, right? And that's a very important thing. So I will ask you a question. What box do you think that most people spend? Well, actually, I'm going to, just because of the way the chat works, I'm going to give you the answer, but I'm going to ask you to tell me why. Okay. So it might surprise you to learn, it might not, that most people spend most of their time, resources, energy ruminating about and talking about the little deal uncontrollable box, right? The suck it up box. If most people spend most of their time and energy there, why? Why do you think they do that? Oh, excellent answers. Beautiful. Yep. Okay. All of that is accurate, right? It's because it's easy. There's a couple of reasons why we do that. And I say we because we're just wired that way as human beings. We have to try not to, right? It's easy. I can complain about that and I don't actually have to do anything. Action and change is terrifying. It's scary. Even if you're ready for it and you're capable and you're going to rock it, it's still scary, okay? So and then here's the other thing, by complaining about spending my time and energy and resources in that box, there's a part of me in the immediate band-aid moments that's getting what I need, okay? So if my friends who are well-meaning are like, oh my gosh, what's wrong? You're so stressed out. And I start complaining about all the little deal, uncontrollable things in my life. They're gonna be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Let's go have coffee or like whatever, and I'm gonna feel validated and I'm gonna feel cared for. And I don't actually have to do anything or take any action or change anything. And I'm still getting that empathy and some of those things that I need. That's enough of a band-aid to get me by. Okay. So people are going to understand that I'm stressed. So I'm going to get that kind of validation and I don't actually have to change. Right. That is so easy and so attractive to us as human beings to kind of stay in that box. So that's one of the things I will offer. I will tell you to catch yourself if you find yourself there, right? What is it that you're complaining about? What is it that you're saying you're stressed about? And I'll be vulnerable and honest. Like yesterday, I had a moment where I was fussing at my family and I was all stressed out. They were like, "What are you so stressed out about?" And I mentioned a bunch of dumb stuff like that the house needed this and that, and I was stressed about this, right? I was like, no, actually, I have my webinar tomorrow. Right? That was the big deal thing for me, right? And all the little deal stuff was the easy stuff for me to complain about. Okay. And so we all do it. I mean, I literally teach the material and I do it. So we got to catch ourselves and we have to focus our resources, our energy, and our attention in the right places, right? We only have so much of us to go around. Let's divide it out properly. Robert, what was that question, if you have it, that I had asked you to capture for me?
So the question says it often depends on how much we determine someone else is the cause of the stress. How do we bring it back to uncontrollable or controllable for us? Would that be part of our ability to regulate emotions?
Got it. Okay. So if I'm understanding that question correctly, it's when we're talking about controllable or uncontrollable or even big deal or little deal, it sounds to me like that fairness and unfairness and just and unjust is really heavily at play here in this question. Like if the other person is the cause of all of that, right? Maybe the controllable part for me, the things that I would look at to determine if it was controllable, even if I was not at fault, would be what about my boundaries, right? Could I put boundaries in place that help with that, right? Could I make changes that help avoid that stressor in my life, even if I shouldn't have to, right? Sometimes this comes down to something like, I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, absolutely, but I think that's also how we learn, right? If you're having a stressor with a friend, and they're part of a friend group that you want to belong to, but this one person is toxic and everything you've tried, this is just causing you so much anxiety and stress in your life. Like you might have to back off of all of them, right? You got to choose you at some point, right? And so there's some collateral damage sometimes that happens in that big, scary action box. And that's kind of what I meant before when I said things change when we take action in those boxes. But also going back to the original question, uh, does that have to do with regulating our emotions? Yes, that's a part of it, right? That is a part of it that happens. I know for me, when there's somebody who is a kind of consistently chipping away at me and being a stressor in my life, my tolerance for anything that that person does or that situation gets much lower, right? And so I may not provide the same grace and mercy. I may not have the same thoughts, therefore I may not have the same emotions, right? And so looking at sort of all of that in the big picture is an important way to. I hope that addressed that question somehow. It was a really good question, but the answer is like yes for all of it, just in kind of different ways and how we apply it. Okay, that's the stress piece. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to connection. But I will we'll have some questions at the end. So I know that was kind of a big one. And if you guys have some more questions, just come back to those for me if you would. Okay, so connection. All right, connection. We already talked about the fact that other people matter. We already talked about building that network and that village of folks, right? And the things that we want to make sure that we are doing. Okay. Um, People who have good connection, right, that have that pillar sort of solidly in place, they're able to build and maintain strong, healthy relationships, right? The maintenance of relationships is often harder than the building, okay? They can use positive and effective communication strategies. They develop empathy. And I say develop because for some folks, and it's okay, for some folks, that doesn't naturally occur at the same level as it does for other folks, right? And so sometimes some people have to work at that a little bit, right? The perspective that gives us empathy. They know how to ask for help. And then they also know how to help in return. They know how to support other people and sort of what that looks like. Okay. We can already start to see the framework of resiliency building in this, right? But here are the specific skills that build this competency. Understanding assertive communication. One of the models that I use is the ideal model, which breaks down the different components of assertive communication. But the specific skill, you want to get to that place, and you want to practice things that are not passive, are not aggressive, but they're in that sweet spot of assertive communication, knowing how to self advocate, knowing how to ask for things that you need or want, knowing how to ask for change, and knowing how to do all of that in ways that are not inappropriate and aggressive, and knowing that they aren't. It's not inappropriate or aggressive to ask for change, right? Those are all skills that build this competency of resiliency. Folks who are less resilient feel guilty about that stuff. They feel like they're out of line. They feel like it's wrong somehow to stand up for themselves, right? And they have a discomfort level. And if you are hearing yourself in that, that's okay, right? Nobody is all 6 pillars of resiliency perfectly. So if this poked at you, and I say that because it pokes at a lot of people. So number one, no, you're not alone in that. It's a very common thing. But it's also kind of good news if you're like, oh, I feel kind of guilty when I want to set boundaries or be assertive, right? This is great news. This means you have discovered the first area of resiliency that you can work on, right? That you know will have a positive effect because there's science and research and evidence that supports it. That if you work on assertive communication, that will help you. Okay. Effective praise is another one. Do we know how to praise people? Do we know how to receive praise and compliments, right? Do we know what that looks like, and how to navigate that without some of that stereotypical awkwardness, right? And how to not just the removal of the awkwardness, but replicating results, right? When we praise people for the types of behaviors we want to see from them, if we do it effectively, it replicates results, right? So knowing those specific skills and being able to practice those so they show up in the game. And then constructive responding. Are we responding to the people in our lives, the relationships that we care about, in ways that are going to continue to build and maintain those relationships in a positive way? Are we supporting people? Are we responding that way, right? And there's a lot of breakdown in kind of what that looks like as well. Okay. So that's connection. We're not doing any of those specific activities today, just in the interest of time. But all of that, like, listening skills and communication skills and all of that stuff that the industry is kind of saturated with. Of course, I have my own that I prefer, but there's a lot out there. So anything that has to do with communication skills, if you're doing that as an intentional practice, you are building that pillar of connection because you are building your skill set to be able to build and maintain and cultivate those positive relationships that you need for resiliency. You're building that village. Okay. Mental agility. What the heck is mental agility? That's the one people don't typically understand. Mental agility is the ability to take in new information, new thoughts, opinions, ideas, things that you might think you disagree with or that you do disagree with, other people's opinions, and to be able to consider them objectively, right? It's the ability to think in a way that I call FAT as the acronym, right? Flexible, accurate, and thorough, right? Is this flexible? Does this leave room for change and new information and learning new things? Is it accurate, or am I participating in any of those thinking traps that we said before? Is this jumping to conclusions? Am I mind reading? Any of those things. And is this thorough? Have I considered all of the angles, right? People who are mentally agile are also able to take in other perspectives, even if we disagree, right? To be able to say, I can see it from that side. I can understand how someone would think that or see it that way. And the added step of not following that with, but they're wrong, right? Like, I can see how someone would think that way and it's just differently than I think, right? To be able to identify and understand problems, particularly conflict problems. When we are having conflict or there's a problem, there's so much power in being able to properly identify it. So many things are addressed because the wrong way because the problems are not properly identified. I know it sounds like that can't possibly be, but it is. And people who are mentally agile, they maintain an openness of trying new strategies. These are the people you can say, well, did you try it this way? Right? Have you thought about this? And they can do that. There are things that we can do to build mental agility, specific practices. This is another one of those aha moments. I knew it belonged in resiliency. You were right. Yay. Problem solving. The same as when we talked about goal setting, problem solving is also a resilience strategy that helps build the skill of mental agility. And I mean, an actual problem solving process, right? I have a 6-step one that I prefer, but again, Google, it's out there. The industry's saturated with all kinds of suggestions about how to walk through problems and how to problem solve, right? But building that skill is proactively on the training field. Again, when we walk through things like a 6-step process of anything, right? That's great for, like, long-term problems or solving something that's kind of hanging out there in the wind. But the idea is we also want that to show up in the game. So when we're faced with a problem in the moment, if we have trained our brain, first I'm going to identify it, then I'm going to do this, then our brain's going to do those things, right? So walking through any of those processes are going to be helpful to train our brain to sort of know what to do when we have problem solving, because then that bleeds into conflict resolution, which is a big one and a hard one to train for, right? But the problem solving activities can train for conflict resolution, and that's really important. Okay. We also have to have specific skills for fighting our confirmation bias. If you remember, I told you before, we are wired with several biases. We talked about the negativity bias. The confirmation bias is another one. And this is where we sort of collect evidence that supports the way that we already think and feel, right? So if one of the most simple ways that I can describe this is, using a student, a child, right? Let's say they fundamentally think they're smart, and they're like, I'm smart, I'm good, right? I'm smart. And they are in one advanced class, one regular class, and one remedial class. They're going to say, I'm in this advanced class, I'm in an honors class, see, I'm smart, right? If they get a C in English on a paper and an A on their biology test, they're going to go, look at this A, I told you I'm smart, right? If they answer a question in class and the teacher says that was partially correct, they're going to go, I was half right. See, I'm smart, right? If the same kid fundamentally thought they were stupid, I am not smart, right? They're going to say, look at this remedial class, I am not smart. Look at this C I got on this English paper, I am not smart. And I didn't get that question right, I am not smart. The exact same things are happening in their world, but they are collecting and holding on to the evidence that supports how they already think and feel, and they are dismissing and writing off everything that doesn't. All right. This is the way that our brains are wired. Our brains find what we tell it to find. And so fighting the confirmation bias is really, really important. Whether they are good fundamental beliefs or bad fundamental beliefs, asking ourselves, what's the evidence for and against these things that we hold on to, can be a very important exercise. Okay. It's a great thing to start with for some of those things that are very self-depreciating. And that's why I use the example, like, do we think we're smart or not smart, right? So obviously, that was a example for a young person, but if you have a fundamental negative belief about yourself or about how the world is or should be or the way another person is, right? Taking a look at that and saying, is there confirmation bias at play here? What's some of the evidence for or against this, right? Sometimes we see this in conversations about politics, right? Sometimes we see like where maybe we're just collecting information and opinions and platitudes about how we already think and feel. So we start to kind of think everybody thinks and feels that way, right? Or that that's, more true than maybe another way of thinking and feeling, right? So we tend to see this in a lot of different places where confirmation bias shows up. And resilient people have, everybody has confirmation bias, but for resilient people, it's not as strong, right? They know to question things they feel real strongly about just to make sure, right? So that's a resilient strategy, is to make sure that we are really fighting, know that we have a confirmation bias and that we are actively fighting against it. Okay. The last pillar that I want to talk about is leveraging our strengths. Okay, this is a little bit more of a difficult one to understand, but there's a very specific resource I want to share with you about this. So people who know what their character strengths are and how to use them, they're able to overcome challenges, reach goals, have that sort of confidence in their personal talents and abilities. Therefore, they can use them with more intentionality, and their self-esteem and their self-value is higher. So there seems to be this sort of I feel like we're getting away from it as a society a little bit more, but it's still kind of there. This idea that the way to improve, or the only way to improve, to kind of evaluate our strengths and our weaknesses and work on improving those weaknesses, right? I will offer that it is more valuable for the sake of resiliency to leverage the strengths than it is to improve weaknesses, right? What are you already good at? What do you bring to the table? How can you leverage that and use that in the best possible way, right? And then the other side of that is, how then do we recognize those same things in other people that may be different than what we bring to the table? And how do we leverage that and honor that as well, right? From that, we have assembling teams and leadership and all these wonderful, beautiful things that we can do with this knowledge, right? So how do we get this knowledge? So there is a survey. I think the link's on the next. It is. All right. So we'll get there. But there is a survey, the Values in Action survey, that you can take, that and the reason I suggest this one is it's standard in the industry. It's got a lot of science research and evidence behind it, and it's also just really good. Like, it gives you so much. It's free, gives you so much great information about what your values and actions are, and there might be some things that surprise you, and there might be some things that don't, right? But like, it's just such a great exercise. It's 240 questions. They're multiple choice. It's gut reaction questions, so it takes about 10 or 15 minutes, okay? And you will learn, it takes the 24 character strengths and it breaks them down, it ranks them 1 to 24. So the idea is that your top 5 are your signature character strengths. And you want to use those, apply those to your work, your school, and your relationships, right? So if I am a creative person, how can I use that creativity? If that was one of my signature character strengths, how can I use that creativity to better what I am doing at work, at school, or in my relationships, right? Versus trying to use something that's number 22 or 23 on my list. It's going to be harder, right? Seek out opportunities to use your signature character strengths, or you can develop in areas that are lesser strengths. But I would recommend only doing that if it's something that you truly value, and you were just very surprised that it wasn't in the top, and you're like, I want to have that, right? I value that. Okay, then it's worthwhile to put some effort there, right? It's also a great exercise to identify the signature character strengths of leaders that you admire, of people that you admire that you think are kind of doing it right. What is it about? What do you think their character strengths are? And how do you observe that they are using them? That can inspire you in ways that you can leverage your own, right? So again, register for a free account here if you're going to do that. There's 240 questions, and here's what they are. So it's creativity, curiosity, judgment, perspective, bravery, perseverance. I'm not going to read them all off the slide. They're all here. But it's a wonderful list that really helps see sort of what I bring to the table and how to use that. Okay. One of the very cool things is that some of these things can't exist together. So if you have a signature character strength of zest for life, you can't also have the signature character strength of caution and prudence, right? However, you can value that and you can admire that in other people. So, and I know we've talked a lot about like youth with resiliency and adults, we talked about both, but from a team's perspective, and from assembling teams or teamwork, take a look at, like, who are you missing? Sometimes I do this with groups of like professional groups, and I'm like, okay, who are we as a group, and who do we need, right? Who aren't we as a group, right? And then also the things that I would look at if we take this is to ask some of those really critical questions. I did this exercise once with a group of military folks who were like majors and above, and none of them, and there was like 60 of them, none of them had leadership as one of their signature character strengths. So at first it was this moment where everyone went, oh, right? And then we really looked at it and we said, what makes a leader? And they had things like social intelligence and perspective and bravery and perseverance, right? So the more specialized they got as leaders, the more the specific trait that was very unique to them as a leader kind of took that precedence, right? So it's very interesting to see, and I share that to say, like, don't panic if the thing you think you need for your job or your life is not one of your top 5. Look at what is your top 5, and is that really a component, a more specialized component of what it is that you thought you had or you're going for anyway, right? And then the other ways that we can use this is like, when you need to get involved in a project or be on a team, like, if creativity is like number 23 or 24 for you, don't offer to create the graphics for it, right? You're going to be miserable. Okay. Like offer to do something that's in your wheelhouse. That's where you shine. The reason why we don't do that as human beings is because these signature character strengths come very easy to us. That's why they're signature character strengths. We've been conditioned to think that if it's easy, we must not be working hard enough, right? And so, oh, all you want me to do is create the graphics? Like, well, what else can I take on? Meanwhile, for somebody for whom that is not a strength, that would be all they could do, right? That is still a huge contribution. So, knowing sort of like just because it's easy, it just means it's naturally occurring in me, and this is a skill and something of value that I bring to the table. The other piece that I want to offer, it might even be on another slide. I stopped clicking. Hold on. Okay. Um yeah, let me look at those. Okay, no. All right. So the other thing that I would offer is that there are shadow sides to these signature character strengths. So usually when I do this exercise and we've taken the quiz and I'm in a workshop, I say, like, so who has humor, right? With a couple of hands go up, and I'll ask, did that ever get you in trouble? Or honesty. Honesty does not mean the same thing as rude, right? So like some of these signature character strengths, if we overuse them, they come with shadow sides, right? It's not always the time that you want to use honesty, no matter how good you are at that, no matter how much of a positive thing that is for you. Or humor, right? Humor can help so much. It's a beautiful signature character strength to have, but sometimes we have to know the time and the place to rely on it, and we can't over rely on those. All right. And then here's my parting thought on, well, is it my parting thought? It's probably not. But here's a thought that I have on signature character strengths. You want to bring them to the table, okay, with intentionality. All right. So what do I mean by that? Lean into them as much as possible. We want to make sure that we are not overvaluing something that we don't have. If we are overvaluing something that we don't have, so this is called the value. This is where I went wrong explaining it. Values in action. The inaction part is the important part. Sometimes people are very upset to see what does not show up in their top 5. Okay. And so then they'll try to lean into ones that are not in the signature character strength. Here's the danger in that. Here's why I say don't do that. There are times in everyone's life where we are going to have to use every single one of these, right? You're not going to avoid using a character strength on this list for your whole life, okay? So those things that are 22, 23, 24 on your list that are lesser strengths, you're going to have to use them at some point. Here's the deal. When you do, you're going to be exhausted, right? It's going to drain you. It's going to be harder for you than it is for somebody that has that in their signature character strength. And you can be excellent at it. You could be terrific. Maybe like let me give an example. Maybe forgiveness, grace and mercy. Maybe that is not a top 5, but you value it. Okay. And you are in a position of leadership at work and somebody made a mistake and you have to navigate that with that person and you do a beautiful job. Absolutely beautiful. You have treated that person with respect. You have been fair. You have exercised grace and mercy. There's a plan in place. You've done a brilliant job, right? You're going to be drained when you go home because it's not one of your naturally occurring signature character strengths. Doesn't mean you can't do it. Doesn't mean you can't do it beautifully. Okay. So knowing that we're going to have to do those things that are not in our signature character strengths means that we want to reserve our energy. Those top 5, nobody has to remind you to do them. Nobody has to tell you, oh, don't forget to be creative if that's one of your 5. You're going to, you're going to try to reinvent every wheel, right? Because that's your jam. You're creative. So when we lean into those, it requires less energy, less personal resources, and it's easier. Okay. And so lean into those as much as possible to reserve your energy for when you have to operate outside of them. And that's one of the best ways that we can build resilience. That makes that pillar nice and strong and holds that up for us because we're reserving our energy to put it in the right places. Okay, so That is an overview of all of the 6 pillars. Here's all the places it came from. Here's one of the things I will tell you is if you're super interested in this topic, one of the best resources that I can share with you is the University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Center. And they've got on their website, they have the resiliency stuff. The Master Resilience Trainer certification that I got back in 2015 was born from their research. And so they've got some wonderful resources available there and some great things that you can do. Even that link for the VIA survey has other surveys and so many great tools and things that you can use. So I would encourage you to explore both of those resources, where the VIA survey came from, and then the University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Department. If you're not familiar with positive psychology, it's so much fun to just look through all of that stuff. And their website does a beautiful job linking to some academic research, some other websites, some books you can get. And they really, for me, they are the industry leaders on this topic, and they really have their thumb on the pulse as it changes. So with that, do we have any other questions? I know you've done a great job asking them all along, but does anybody have anything else they are burning to ask or want to share? Oh, thank you, Becky. That was a very kind compliment. I appreciate that. That made my day. And yes, the 6 pillars is from the Pennsylvania research, the UPenn research. Y'all are too kind. It's going so fast. I'm not catching all of it, but I feel like I should take the rest of the day off because I'm going to quit while I'm ahead.
Thank you so much, Ms. Holly. Looks like a lot of people are very pleased with the presentation. Um, yeah, there are a lot of good compliments in the chat coming up. One person says, "You have helped me during a difficult time in my life. Profoundly useful information." So thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I am going to switch over to our conclusion PowerPoint. What I'm going to do is I see some comments in the chat regarding some of the resources that were shared today. So I'm going to drop, this has the PowerPoint slides. I see that's been asked for. It also has a gratitude journal, as well as the stress management activity. I've also copied the link to the University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Center, and as well the survey for this webinar. So on the slide, we have included Ms. Holly's contact information so you can contact her with any further questions about today's presentation. Thank you again for all the work you put into this webinar and all the valuable information you shared with us today. Please note, ladies and gentlemen, a couple of items of business before we conclude. You can see in the chat panel the link for today's survey. Additionally, when I end today's webinar here in just a moment, your browser will come up with a pop-up to take you to an evaluation on FATF's website. If you want to receive CE credits or a statement of credit for this event, you must complete that evaluation. You will be prompted to sign in or register to complete the evaluation. You can register as a visitor at no cost. For CEs to be reported to CE Broker for the Florida licensed healthcare practitioners, you must provide an accurate Florida Department of Health license prefix and number the first time you register. After you register or sign in, you will be directed onwards to the evaluation. You must use the same email address you used when you registered for today's webinar and when you set up your profile in FATA system. This is the only way to connect your attendance at today's webinar and your profile on our website. You will get a second opportunity to complete the evaluation through a follow-up email later today. As a reminder, the evaluation will close at midnight on Saturday, September 16th, 2023. Do not email statements of credit. Instead, after we have verified your attendance and completion of the evaluation, a statement of credit will be generated as a journal entry within your profile 30 business days after the evaluation closes. As a reminder, the recording and the materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FATA website within 30 business days. To access the recording and PowerPoint, visit www.fata.org, navigate to the Resource Center, and click on Training Library as shown on the screen. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. I'd like to say thank you again to Ms. Holley for the information. We'd also like to recognize and thank the Florida Department of Children and Families for funding today's education. Have a great day, everyone. Please hold for the evaluation.